Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Joseph Jomo Pierre's Shakespeare's N. And I will tell you right now, at the outset, I'm not going to say the N-word. I do not belong to the frankly ridiculous school of thought that says if an author has put a racial or ethnic slur into their work, that we as critics or teachers necessarily need to say that aloud. I don't believe that's true, and so I am not going to do it. You have an image of the cover of this play at the beginning of this video. You can infer what it is from the title of the video and the description, but I'm not going to say it. So, proceeding from that premise, this play is really an interesting sort of semi-meta-theatrical reimagining of Shakespeare's relationship to two of his characters, to Othello, from obviously Othello, and to Aaron from Titus Andronicus, which, full disclosure, I haven't actually read. But it's about the detrimental effects of slavery and racism. And I'm mostly going to talk about slavery, but just sort of read that as that pairing of slavery and racism throughout. So essentially, a sort of plot summary is that Shakespeare in this version is a slave owner. He has at least 3 slaves, presumably more. Othello, who's a kind of house slave / valet, someone who very clearly has Shakespeare's trust and whom he treats almost as an equal. Then we have Aaron, who is a rebellious, angry slave who's dedicated to getting his freedom. Then we have Titus, who... Titus is an interesting figure because he's an old man. He's privy to some secrets that he reveals periodically throughout. He's sympathetic to both Aaron and Othello. And so he's this weird sort of interesting middle figure who's kind of on everybody's side. Then you have Shakespeare and you have his daughter Judith. Now, throughout much of the play, Aaron is being punished for attempting to escape. In scene 2, we actually have him being whipped, and about maybe 2/3 of the way through scene 2, maybe half the way through scene 2, it's actually revealed that Othello is doing the whipping. So that's the first thing that I do actually really want to talk about in terms of this play and one of its thematic concerns, but I'll come back to that in just a second. But what happens is that we find out it gradually becomes more and more obvious that Judith is having an affair with Aaron. They have a sexual relationship. Othello is in love with Judith, but she doesn't reciprocate his feelings. It's not necessarily clear that she and Aaron are in love, but they have some sort of strong affection for one another, and they have a sexual relationship through which she gets pregnant. Shakespeare, of course, as a slave owner, does not know that his daughter is having sex with one of his slaves until later in the play, after Othello catches them having sex. He goes back basically and tells Shakespeare, whereupon Shakespeare decides he's going to hang Aaron. Judith is pregnant with Aaron's child. She gives birth prematurely, almost certainly. She wants Aaron to kill this child because it's tangible proof of their sexual relationship, which, of course, endangers her social standing. Aaron refuses to do so. Othello comes in right after the birth of this child. He attempts to kill Judith, and then Aaron overpowers him and actually doesn't. Othello dies, but I'll come back to how he dies, because I think it's really significant. And I'm not 100% sure what I make of it, but I've got some thoughts. So then Judith dies as well, and Aaron's slave revolt against Shakespeare begins, and the slaves rise up. They burn Shakespeare's house. Aaron has a climactic final confrontation with Shakespeare, during which he confronts the playwright with Shakespeare's granddaughter, Aaron's daughter by Judith. And there's a really interesting bit right at the end that I'm also going to talk about. So, this is fundamentally a play about the evils of slavery, and one of the big themes that Pierre deals with here is dividing blacks against one another, dividing slaves against one another. And this is primarily played out through the antagonism between Othello and Joseph. Othello and Aaron. So what we get our first indication of this in scene 2, when it's revealed that Othello is the one whipping Aaron for having escaped. A fellow slave is the one charged with meting out the punishment for Aaron seeking his freedom. So right from that moment, we have this idea that these two characters are the primary antagonists on some level. And it's clear that Shakespeare is pulling the strings here. It's clear that the slave owner is pulling the strings, because he gets to decide whether or not Othello continues to beat Aaron. Several times Shakespeare says 6 more lashes. But there's also a moment in which Othello wants to continue lashing Aaron, and Shakespeare stops him. So this is, again, very clearly under Shakespeare's control, but the conflict is between the two black characters. Now this sort of carries on throughout, and it becomes more and more centered on Judith, because Othello has grown up with Judith. Again, he's in Shakespeare's household in some capacity, so he's grown up with Judith, and he believes that he's in love with her, even going so far toward the end of the play as asking Shakespeare to give permission for him to marry her, which Shakespeare, of course, denies, for 2 reasons. One is that Othello is black. The second reason I'll tell you in just a few minutes. Whereas Aaron does have sexual access to Judith, he has some degree of romantic access to Judith, but that's not as clear. Whether they have sort of a genuine emotional connection is somewhat less clear. So that becomes a big point of contention, that sort of, in effect, that competition over the affections of white characters. And even in the moments when Shakespeare and Othello are talking about Aaron, and Shakespeare sort of suggests that he has some degree of admiration for Aaron, some degree of admiration for this slave who fiercely demands his freedom and refuses to buckle under to the system, that seems to sort of enrage Othello. So, I mean, like the actual Othello of Shakespeare's play, this is a character who is driven by jealousy, and who's driven almost by paranoia about those around him, particularly white people around him betraying his affection. And so that becomes this sort of central conflict between these two characters. But I want to go to the point where Othello dies, because this is really interesting to me. Now, he has just found Judith, Aaron, and Tyrus. Judith and Aaron's daughter has just been born. Othello comes in. In his rage at this tangible evidence of the sexual relationship that doesn't involve him, he attempts to kill Judith. And what it says here in the stage directions: Othello then moves in and forcefully kisses her. Seeing this, Aaron moves towards him. Othello raises his dagger to come down on Judith as he kisses her. Aaron intercepts the attempt and both men struggle on the ground. We eventually end with Aaron mounted on Othello with the dagger to his chest. Othello says, "Kill me." Judith says, "Aaron." Othello says, "I see it in your eyes." Tyrus says, "Aaron." Pause. Conflicted, Aaron says nothing, does nothing. This is the point I think it gets really interesting. Othello reaches up, his hands clasped around Aaron's, and drives the dagger into his own chest. His eyes locked with the dying Othello, Aaron draws the knife out and stabs him several more times. So here we have a really conflicted murder-suicide. I mean, Othello kills himself in that he drives the dagger into his own chest, but he uses Aaron's hands to do it. And that seems to open the door for Aaron to actually stab Othello multiple times. So we have here a gesture in which the two black characters remain deeply antagonistic, and even Othello's suicide is an antagonistic gesture. He ensures that his blood is on Aaron's hands by using Aaron's hands to drive the knife into himself. So even in his suicide, Othello ensures Aaron's guilt, and then Aaron again repeatedly stabs Othello after that. So we have this fundamental antagonism played out in this moment. But the other thing we have black characters divided and set against one another as enemies. The other thing that we have here is families divided. So one of the things that we find out that Tyrus reveals is that Othello is actually Shakespeare's son. That Shakespeare had had an affair with the Dark Lady from the Sonnet series, who was in fact African or of African descent, and that their child, Othello, because he was black, Shakespeare never acknowledges him as his son, which of course was very standard practice for slave owners. Like this is of course rooted in history. Slave owners continually raped, in reality, their slaves, even if these were in some rare cases emotionally engaged relationships. Because of the power differential, this was rape, and that's all there is to it. So Shakespeare has a child with the Dark Lady. She dies giving birth to Othello. Shakespeare raises Othello as, again, a house slave, valet, whatever it is, but never acknowledges him as a relation. Which gives us a sort of Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia kind of thing with Othello's romantic sexual desire for Judith, who is in fact his half-sibling, as we find out. And that's the other reason that Shakespeare won't give permission for Othello to marry Judith, is because he does know that they're related. So we have that sort of division, that families being split apart component, but then we also have Judith and her baby, because she wants Aaron to kill their daughter to eliminate the physical evidence of their sexual relationship. Aaron refuses to do this, but he does give Judith the knife. And he tells Judith if she wants the baby dead, she has to do it herself, which she attempts to do. So again, this is another sort of white character disowning or disavowing their half-black child. But we have a further sort of breakup of the family component here, because when Judith goes to stab her baby, Aaron grabs her hand and drives the knife into her own body. So whatever emotional connection they had, whatever affection that they had for one another, is now gone. Aaron has completely dismissed that out of the desire to protect his child, which is, I mean, that in itself is a positive component, but he's also just murdered the mother of that child. Now, this again kicks off the slave revolt that burns down Shakespeare's house and ultimately sort of destroys or leaves open the possibility of destroying the institution of slavery and for the black characters to reclaim their own identities. And we have a really interesting moment right near the very end here when Aaron confronts Shakespeare, because this is a great sort of meta-theatrical moment. Now, throughout the play, there actually are quotations from Shakespeare's plays, including from Othello, from The Merchant of Venice, from other plays, etc., etc. But we get here the first sort of direct acknowledgement of Shakespeare as the creator of Aaron and Othello as characters, because Shakespeare says, "Surely I've lost control, but I did love you, Aaron. I created you all, loved you all." And Aaron says, "Then why was my tongue tied so tight?" Which, of course, is a great line in confronting the sort of racist history of Shakespeare's ethnic characters and of performances of Shakespeare's ethnic characters. I mean, so many productions of Othello have been done in blackface. So many productions of The Merchant of Venice have made use of anti-Semitic tropes. So many productions of The Tempest have presented Caliban as a black-skinned, inhuman monster. This idea, why was my tongue tied so tight? That Shakespeare, and again, I'm sympathetic to it was the late early 1600s, and so Shakespeare simply didn't live in a context where non-white, non-Northern European ethnic characters would be given a legitimate voice. But Aaron is here confronting Shakespeare from the position of Aaron, the character in Titus Andronicus. Then why was my tongue tied so tight? And Shakespeare says, "All the world's a stage. We are all simply players. That was your part to play." Aaron says, No, it was the part you would have me play. This was my part." That is the slave revolt. "Had my tongue not been tied, you would have known." And Shakespeare says, "How could I know? How could I know?" So that's a really powerful gesture right at the end of this play. this idea that we don't sort of have to accept racially problematic depictions from canonical figures like Shakespeare, or whatever it is. That we can challenge these things and we can find new voices for characters who are ethnically problematic, racially problematic.